The Vaylani were not warriors. They had never been warriors. In all the millions of years their species had existed, they had never fired a weapon in anger. They were farmers, builders, and caretakers of living worlds. Their colonies were covered in vast green fields and shimmering forests that stretched from pole to pole. They fed half the galaxy, and in return, the galaxy left them alone. That agreement ended on a Tuesday. The first attack came without warning. 3 colony worlds on the outer edge of Vaylani space went silent within the same hour. Communication links dropped. Sensor stations stopped transmitting. Supply ships approaching the systems found nothing but debris and silence. Then the distress calls began. They came from Vaylani cargo ships, passenger transports, and orbital platforms. Scattered, broken transmissions filled with screaming and static. They spoke of black ships. Enormous black ships that came out of nowhere and dissolved everything they touched. Captain Lena Marsh heard the first distress call while sitting in the mess hall of the human frigate Pale Horizon, eating a bowl of soup. She put the spoon down and did not pick it up again. Lena was 34 years old, lean and dark-haired, with a scar along her jaw from a training accident she never talked about. She had been commanding the Pale Horizon for 2 years, running supply missions and patrol routes along the quiet borders of Concord space. It was easy duty, boring even. She had never fired her ship's weapons outside of a drill. But Lena Marsh had been trained by people who did not believe in easy duty. Every officer in the human fleet was. From the day they entered the academy, they were taught that the peace would not last, that something was out there, that one day the alarm would sound for real. Lena reached the bridge in under a minute. Her crew was already at their stations. Lieutenant Kyle Brogan, her tactical officer, looked up from his console with a face that was much too calm for a man reading the data he was reading. 4 Vaylani colony worlds hit, Kyle said. The attackers are unknown. No Concord identification, no communication. They are just killing everything. How close are we? Lena asked. The Threshold system is 4 hours at maximum speed. There is a Vaylani refugee convoy there, trying to reach the inner corridor. They are being chased. Lena opened a channel to Earth's Central Command. The response came quickly, too quickly, as if they had been waiting for this exact call. The orders were simple. Observe and do not engage. Lena read the orders twice. She looked at the data on Kyle's screen, the convoy, the refugees, the ships chasing them. She looked at the estimated number of civilians on those transports. 42,000, mostly children and elderly, because the Vaylani always evacuated the vulnerable first. She closed the channel. Kyle, she said, set course for Threshold, maximum speed. Kyle looked at her. Our orders say to observe. I heard the orders, so we are ignoring them. We are interpreting them creatively. Set course. Kyle almost smiled. Almost. He turned back to his console, and the Pale Horizon jumped to faster-than-light speed. 4 hours later, they dropped out of subspace on the edge of the Threshold system, and Lena Marsh saw war for the first time. The Vaylani convoy was a ragged line of transport ships, big, slow vessels with thin hulls and no weapons. They were running as fast as they could toward the system's inner jump point, but they were not fast enough. 3 enemy destroyers were closing on them from behind. The destroyers were black, angular, and enormous, each one at least 5 times the size of the Pale Horizon. They moved through space with a strange sliding motion, as if the normal rules of physics were only a suggestion to them. As Lena watched, one of the destroyers fired. A beam of pale white light struck the rearmost transport. The ship did not explode. It did not break apart. It simply came undone. The metal, the glass, the air, and everything inside dissolved into a fine gray mist that scattered into the void. 3,000 lives, gone in less than 2 seconds. Lena gripped the arms of her command chair. Her knuckles went white. The bridge was silent. Every crew member stared at their screens, and every face showed the same thing: horror and fury in equal measure. "All hands," Lena said, and her voice was steady, even though her heart was hammering. "We are engaging the enemy." The pale horizon surged forward. Now, the galaxy believed that the pale horizon was a light frigate armed with standard patrol weapons, a few low-power energy turrets, and a single torpedo launcher. That was what the ship's public specifications said. That was what every Concord registry listed. The public specifications were a lie. As the pale horizon closed the distance, panels along its hull slid open, revealing weapon systems that had no name in any Concord database. Kinetic lance batteries locked into firing position, long magnetic accelerators designed to fire solid tungsten rounds at nearly 1/5 the speed of light. An electromagnetic disruption array unfolded from the ship's spine like the wings of a bird, capable of flooding an enemy vessel's systems with enough interference to blind it completely. And deep inside the ship, a compact fusion core that the Concorde thought was a standard engine turned out to be something far more powerful, feeding energy to systems that were never supposed to exist on a ship this size. "Weapons free," Lena said. Kyle Brogan's hands moved across his console like a musician playing a very dangerous instrument. He had trained for this his entire career. Every human tactical officer had. They ran simulations every week. Not the simple combat drills the Concorde practiced, but complex, layered scenarios designed to prepare them for an enemy that fought differently than anything the galaxy had seen. The first kinetic lance round hit the nearest destroyer at 60,000 kilometers per second. It punched through the enemy's hull like a needle through paper, entering on one side and exiting the other, leaving a tunnel of molten metal and vented atmosphere behind it. The destroyer shuddered and began to list. The second and third rounds hit within moments, striking the ship's propulsion section. Something inside the destroyer erupted, a white flash, then a spreading cloud of debris. One down. The second destroyer turned toward the pale horizon. It fired that same pale beam, the one that dissolved matter. Kyle had been watching for it. He had been counting the seconds between the enemy's shots, measuring the beam's width, calculating its range. "Hard port, 30 degrees down, now," he said. Lena did not question him. She threw the ship into a diving turn that pushed every crew member hard against their restraints. The beam passed so close that the hull temperature spiked by 200 degrees on the starboard side, but it missed. The electromagnetic disruption array fired. It was invisible to the eye, but its effect was immediate. The second destroyer's running lights flickered and died. Its weapons went dark. Its engines sputtered and fell silent. The ship drifted, blind and helpless. 2 more kinetic lance rounds finished it. The third destroyer did something none of them expected. It stopped. It hung motionless in space for a long moment, as if it was thinking. Then it turned away from the convoy, away from the pale horizon, and slid back into subspace. It ran. The bridge was quiet for a long time. Kyle leaned back in his chair and let out a breath he had been holding for what felt like an hour. "Well," he said, "that happened." Lena opened a wideband communication channel. Her hands were shaking, but she held them steady enough. "This is Captain Lena Marsh of the human frigate Pale Horizon to all Veilani transports. The enemy has been destroyed or driven off. You are safe. Follow us to the inner corridor, and we will escort you to Concord space." The Veilani communication officer on the lead transport spoke in a voice that trembled with confusion and something close to awe. "Captain Marsh, we thank you, but we do not understand. Our records show your vessel is a light patrol frigate. What we just witnessed should not have been possible." Lena paused. She thought about the orders she had disobeyed. She thought about the 60 years of secrecy. She thought about the thousands of lives on those transports. "You are welcome," she said simply. "We can discuss the details later. Right now, let us get your people to safety." She closed the channel and sat back in her chair. Kyle looked at her from his station. "Central Command is going to be very upset with you," he said. "Probably. You just showed the entire galaxy that a human frigate can kill destroyers 5 times its size. Yes, they are going to have questions." Lena looked out through the viewport at the Vylani transports, already forming up behind the pale horizon. 42,000 lives, children, families, people who grew food and tended forests, and had never hurt anyone. "Let them ask," she said. 6 hours later, on the far side of the galaxy, High Matriarch Yulevine of the Vylani Collective sat alone in her chambers and read the report from the Threstle system. She read it 3 times. Then she drafted a private message to every member of the Concord Assembly. The message was short. "The humans are not what we believed. I think they never were." The Concord Assembly had not been this full in over a century. Every seat was taken. Every delegation was present. Species that had not sent representatives in decades were here now, standing in the aisles and crowding the observation galleries above. Fear had brought them together. In the 3 weeks since the first attack, the enemy, which the Concord had begun calling the Absence, because no one knew what else to call something that left nothing behind, had struck 7 more systems across 3 different empires. Colony worlds, mining stations, trade outposts, all dissolved into dust. The death toll had crossed 10 million and was climbing fast. The Concord's 3 great military powers had responded. The Draven Sovereignty sent its feared battle fleets. The Corvani Empire deployed its massive war cruisers. The Elythian League launched its fast attack squadrons. They were the strongest forces in the known galaxy, tested by centuries of conflict and armed with the best technology their civilizations could produce. They lost. The Battle of Carvin's Reach had been the worst. A combined fleet of over 800 Draven and Corvani warships engaged in absence formation of roughly 300 vessels. The Concord fleet was destroyed in less than 4 hours. 600 ships gone, 200,000 crew members dead. The Absence lost 11 ships. The numbers were still on every screen in the assembly chamber when the emergency session began. Delegate Vorath Sen of the Draven Sovereignty was the first to speak. He looked different than he had at the last summit. The arrogance was still there, but underneath it was something new, something raw and close to panic. "We are losing," Vorath said. His voice carried through the silent chamber. "Every engagement has ended in defeat. Our weapons barely scratch their hulls. Our shields cannot stop their beams. At this rate, they will reach the core worlds within 2 months." He paused and looked around the room. "I call upon every member species to commit their full military forces to a combined defense. Everything we have, every ship, every soldier, every weapon. If we do not fight together, we will die alone." The chamber murmured with agreement. Delegates nodded. Some looked sick. Then Diane Hartley stood up. She walked to the central podium slowly, with the measured pace of someone who had been carrying a very heavy weight for a very long time, and was about to set it down. She wore a simple gray suit, no decorations, no symbols. She looked tired, and for the first time in her long career, she did not try to hide it. "Members of the Concord," she began, "before we discuss a combined defense, humanity has something to tell you. We chose not to, and I will explain why. But first, I need you to listen." The chamber went quiet. Not the restless quiet of boredom, but the deep, tight quiet of people who sense that something is about to change. 60 years ago, when humanity joined this Concord, we were exactly what you thought we were. a small, young species with modest ships and no real power. That part was true. But on the day we were accepted into the Concorde, our leaders made a decision. They looked at this galaxy. They studied its history, the wars, the extinctions, the empires that rose and fell. They read your own records, your own accounts of civilizations wiped out by enemies from beyond the rim. And they came to a conclusion. She paused. The conclusion was that it would happen again. Not if, when. Something would come out of the dark, something powerful enough to threaten everything. And when it did, the Concorde, for all its strength, might not be enough. WasHFY shifted in his seat. His eyes were locked on Diane. So humanity began to prepare, Diane continued. Quietly, secretly. For 60 years, behind the face we showed you, the traitors, the diplomats, the harmless little species from the outer arm, we built something else. She touched a control on the podium, and the chamber's central holographic display activated. The image that appeared was a star map of the galaxy, but it was covered in thousands of small blue dots that no one in the room had ever seen before. What you are looking at is the current deployment map of Earth's military infrastructure. Every blue marker represents a concealed asset, a weapons platform, a sensor array, a communications relay, a supply cache, or a fleet anchorage. There are over 14,000 of them, spread across every sector of Concorde space. Not a whisper, not a breath. But that is just the infrastructure, Diane said. She touched the control again. The display changed. 12 large red formations appeared at different points across the galaxy, each one pulsing gently. Earth does not maintain one fleet. Earth maintains 12 strategic fleets, hidden in subspace pockets that we constructed over the past 4 decades. Each fleet consists of between 3,000 and 4,000 warships. Someone in the chamber made a sound, a short, choked gasp. Diane did not stop. The total number of combat-ready vessels currently under Earth's command is approximately 42,000. They range from fast-attack corvettes to heavy cruisers to dreadnought-class capital ships. The largest of these dreadnoughts are over 9 kilometers long. The holographic display shifted again, showing rotating images of human warships. They looked nothing like the modest patrol vessels the galaxy had seen. They were angular, dense, and covered in weapon batteries. They looked like they had been designed by people who thought about war every single day and had never once stopped. Our weapon systems include kinetic lance batteries, capable of firing projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. Gravitational lance arrays that can collapse the internal structure of an enemy vessel. Quantum disruption warheads that destabilize matter at the subatomic level. And temporal displacement shields that shift our hull plating slightly out of phase with normal space, reducing incoming damage by over 90%. Diane paused again. The silence in the chamber was so complete that the hum of the station's life support systems sounded like thunder. On the ground, Earth maintains a standing army of over 300 million soldiers, equipped with powered combat armor, and supported by autonomous weapons platforms. Our soldiers train continuously. They have been training for 60 years for a war we hoped would never come. She closed the display and looked out at the assembly. Hundreds of alien faces stared back at her. Some were pale, some were trembling, a few were crying, species whose tear ducts work differently than humans, leaking thin lines of colored fluid down their faces. WasHFY was on his feet. His scales had gone dark, which in Draven body language meant either extreme fear or extreme rage. His voice shook when he spoke. "You lied to us," he said. "For 60 years, you sat among us, smiled at us, traded with us, and all the while you were building the largest military force this galaxy has ever seen. You could have conquered us at any time." Diane looked at him. "Yes," she said, "we could have." "Then why," WasHFY demanded, Why hide it? Nathan Cole, who had been standing behind Diane's delegation, stepped forward. He had not spoken in an assembly session in 15 years. Every eye turned to him. Because we did not build this to conquer you, Nathan said. His voice was calm, the way it always was, but it carried through the chamber like a blade. We built this because we knew that someday something would come that you could not stop. And we decided, 60 years ago, that we would rather be judged for keeping secrets than attend your funerals. The chamber erupted. Dozens of delegates shouted at once. Accusations of betrayal, demands for explanations, questions about whether humanity could be trusted. Diane raised her hand and waited. Slowly, painfully, the noise died down. I understand your anger, she said. I understand your fear. You are right to feel both. We kept this from you, and that was a violation of the trust this Concord is built on. I will not pretend otherwise. She took a breath. But the enemy is here. The absence is real, and it is destroying everything in its path. Your fleets have fought bravely, and they have lost. This is not a judgment. It is a fact. Humanity has the power to fight this enemy. We believe we can win, but we will not act without your permission. She looked around the chamber one final time. Humanity is ready, but only if you ask us. The silence that followed was the longest of Diane Hartley's life. Then High Matriarch Yulevine of the Veilani Collective rose from her seat. She was old and small, her wings folded tight against her back, her voice thin but clear. My people are dying, she said. My worlds are burning. I do not care what humanity hid or why. I care that they are offering to help, and I am not too proud to accept. She looked at Diane. I ask. The Corvani delegate stood. I ask. The Elithian delegate stood. I ask. One by one across the chamber, every delegation rose. Every species, every empire, every small colony world that had a voice in the Concord, they stood, and they asked. Vorath Sen was the last. He remained in his seat, his jaw clenched, his dark eyes burning. The entire chamber looked at him. Slowly, as if every muscle in his body was fighting the motion, Vorath stood. He did not speak. He simply gave one short, sharp nod. Diane Hartley closed her eyes for just a moment. Then she opened them and said, Admiral Dunn, you have authorization. Begin deployment. Somewhere in the deep black of space, 12 fleets that the galaxy never knew existed began to move. The Veilros Corridor was a narrow stretch of space between two massive nebulae, roughly 60 light-years long and 12 light-years wide. It was the only clear path from the outer rim to the galaxy's core worlds. If the Absence wanted to reach the heart of the Concord, it had to pass through here. Admiral Greg Dunn intended to make sure it did not. Greg stood on the command bridge of the Dreadnought Longbow, a 9-kilometer warship that carried more firepower than some species' entire fleets. He was 61 years old, with a shaved head and hands that were rough from decades of service. He had never commanded a battle this large. No human ever had. No one in the history of the galaxy ever had. The combined fleet filled the Veilros Corridor like a wall of iron and light. 6,000 warships, 4,000 human, 2,000 from the Concord's member species, arranged in a layered formation that Greg had designed over the course of 40 sleepless hours. Human dreadnoughts formed the center. Corvani war cruisers held the flanks. Draven battle groups covered the upper and lower approaches. Elithian fast attack ships waited in reserve, ready to strike wherever the line bent. And behind them, hidden in subspace, 8 additional human fleets waited for Greg's signal. On the far side of the corridor, the Absence was coming. The long-range sensors showed the enemy fleet as a dark mass of contacts. Over 9,000 vessels, moving in a formation that looked less like a military arrangement and more like a swarm. They filled the corridor from edge to edge, their black angular hulls blotting out the stars behind them. Greg watched them approach on the main display. Next to him, Dr. Megan Holt stood at a secondary console, monitoring a system that was not part of the Longbow's standard equipment. She was a small woman with short brown hair and glasses that she kept pushing up her nose, and she looked completely out of place on a warship bridge. She was a physicist, not a soldier, but the device she had helped build, the comm field array, might be the most important weapon in this battle. "How long until they are in range?" Greg asked. 17 minutes, Kyle Brogan's voice came through the tactical channel. He was aboard the Pale Horizon, now serving as Commodore Lena Marsh's flagship at the head of the fast attack squadrons. Greg opened a fleet-wide channel. His voice went out to 6,000 ships, to millions of crew members from a dozen different species. "This is Admiral Dunn. The enemy is approaching. Many of you have never fought beside humans before. Some of you still do not trust us. I understand that. Trust takes time, and we have not earned enough of it yet. But today, we fight for the same thing, our right to exist. Follow your orders, and know that whatever happens in the next few hours, you are not alone." He closed the channel and looked at the approaching swarm one more time. "All fleets," he said, "execute formation Anvil." The 12 human fleets moved. They emerged from subspace simultaneously, not just in the corridor, but around it, above, below, and behind the absence formation. Thousands of ships appeared, where seconds before there had been empty space, their hulls catching the light of distant stars. The absence fleet, which had been advancing in a straight line with the confidence of a predator that had never met anything strong enough to challenge it, suddenly found itself surrounded. For 3 long seconds, the absence fleet stopped moving. Greg Dunn smiled, and it was not a kind smile. All ships opened fire. The galaxy had never seen violence on this scale. Gravitational lance arrays sent invisible beams across the void that collapsed the internal structures of enemy ships, crushing them inward like paper balls. Kinetic lance batteries launched tungsten rounds that crossed the distance between fleets in fractions of a second, punching through hulls and reactors. Quantum disruption warheads, missiles that destabilized matter at the deepest level, detonated inside the enemy formation, and every absence ship within the blast radius simply stopped existing. The Concorde ships fired alongside them. Draven plasma cannons blazed orange and red. Corvani mass drivers hurled heavy projectiles. Illithian energy beams cut through the dark. They were outgunned compared to the human fleet, but they fought with a fury that made up for it. Species that had watched their worlds burn, their people die, and were now given a chance to fight back. They always fought back. Their pale dissolution beams swept across the combined fleet, and every beam that connected erased a ship from existence. A Corvani cruiser vanished in a wash of white light. 2 Draven frigates dissolved in the same second. A human destroyer was hit amidships and broke apart, its crew lost before they could reach the escape pods. The casualties mounted with terrible speed. The fleet communication channels filled with damage reports, distress calls, and silence where there should have been voices. Lena Marsh pushed the Pale Horizon into the heart of the enemy formation. She had been given a specific target, a large vessel near the center of the absent swarm that intelligence analysis suggested was a command node. If they could destroy it, the enemy's coordination might weaken. "Kyle, talk to me," Lena said as the ship shook from a near miss. Kyle Brogan's fingers danced across his tactical console. He was calculating firing solutions, tracking enemy movements, and plotting evasion courses simultaneously. His brain worked faster under pressure. It always had, ever since the academy. "The command node is 1,200 kilometers ahead. 3 escort vessels between us and the target. I have solutions for all 3, but we need to be closer." Then we get closer. All power to forward shields and engines. The Pale Horizon surged forward. Two escort ships fired at them. Kyle called out evasion maneuvers, and Lena executed them without hesitation. Hard turns, sudden drops, rolls that pushed the ship's frame to its limits. The pale horizon twisted through the enemy fire like a knife through water. Kyle fired the kinetic lances. Two escort ships died. The third turned to engage, and Lena flew directly at it, passing so close that the two hulls nearly touched, while Kyle put 3 rounds through its engine section at point-blank range. The command node was ahead of them. It was the largest absence ship Lena had ever seen, a massive angular structure surrounded by a web of energy tendrils that connected it to the ships around it. "Fire everything," Lena said. The pale horizon emptied its weapons into the command node. Kinetic rounds, disruption charges, the electromagnetic array. Everything hit the target in a concentrated burst that lasted less than 10 seconds. The command node broke apart. The energy tendrils snapped and faded. Around it, dozens of absence ships suddenly staggered, their movements becoming erratic and confused. But the pale horizon paid for its victory. A dissolution beam caught the ship's port side as it turned away. The beam did not hit squarely. The temporal displacement shields deflected most of it, but enough got through to tear open 3 decks and vent half the port compartments into space. Lena was thrown from her chair. Her head struck the edge of her console, and the world went white, then red, then blurry. She could feel blood running down her face. Alarms screamed. Smoke filled the bridge. Kyle was slumped over his console, unconscious. Blood seeped from a gash on his arm. "Damage report," Lena croaked. Her second engineer's voice came through, shaking. "Port decks 7 through 9 are gone. We have lost 30% of crew on those decks. Engines at 40%. Weapons at 20%. Lena pulled herself back into her chair. Her vision swam, but she could still see the main display. The pale horizon was drifting, crippled but alive. Aboard the longbow, Greg Dunn saw the command node's destruction on his display. He saw the confusion spreading through the absence fleet, and he turned to Megan Holt. "Doctor, now." Megan's hands trembled as she entered the activation sequence. The calm field array was built into the longbow's core, a massive device that generated a subspace disruption field across an enormous area. It was designed to cut the absence off from whatever dimension or frequency they used to communicate with each other. It had never been tested at full power. There was no guarantee it would work. She pressed the final key. The effect was invisible, but its results were immediate. Across the entire battlefield, every absence ship shuddered at the same instant. Their movements, which had been coordinated with eerie precision, fell apart. Ships began to drift. Some turned in circles. Some collided with each other. The dissolution beams, which had been firing with deadly accuracy, began shooting at empty space. Greg Dunn leaned forward in his chair. "All ships," he said. "Full assault. Every gun, every missile, every weapon you have. Hit them now." The combined fleet surged forward. 6,000 ships, battered, bleeding, some barely holding together, threw themselves at the disoriented enemy with everything they had left. The battle lasted another 6 hours. It was brutal, grinding, close-range fighting. Ships dueled at distances where crews could see each other's hulls. Explosions lit the corridor like a second sunrise. The debris field grew so thick that navigation became a hazard in itself. But the absence could not recover. Without coordination, without communication, they fought as individuals, and individuals could be overwhelmed. One by one, then in groups, then in waves, the black angular ships were torn apart. When the last absence vessel was destroyed, the silence that fell over the fleet channel was heavier than any sound Lena had ever heard. She sat in the wrecked bridge of the pale horizon. Sparks fell from the ceiling. The viewport was cracked in 3 places, but through the fractures she could see the debris field. Thousands of shattered ships, human and alien, stretching across the corridor like a graveyard made of metal and light. Kyle stirred beside her. He opened his eyes, winced, and looked around at the ruined bridge. "Did we win?" he asked quietly. Lena looked out at the field of wreckage. She thought about the ships that were not there anymore, the people who were not there anymore, the cost. "Yeah," she whispered, "we did it." On the longbow, Greg Dunn sat in his command chair and stared at the tactical display. The enemy contacts were gone. All of them. The corridor was clear. He reached up and removed his headset. He placed it on the arm of his chair very carefully, as if it might break. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes. They had won. But the price was beyond anything he had imagined. Over 1,500 ships destroyed. Hundreds of thousands dead. Humans, Draven, Corvani, Illithian, and a dozen other species, all of them gone. Megan Holt stood beside him, her hands still shaking. "Admiral," she said softly. "It worked." Greg opened his eyes. He looked at her, and for a moment his calm broke. Just for a moment. Then he pulled it back. "Yes," he said, "it worked." He opened the fleet channel one last time. "This is Admiral Dunn. The enemy has been destroyed. All ships begin rescue operations immediately. Find our people. Find everyone. No one gets left behind." And in the silence that followed, somewhere in the wreckage of the Veilrose corridor, the galaxy began to breathe again. 6 months passed, and the galaxy was still learning how to be itself again. The absence had been driven beyond the galactic rim. Deep space patrols, now jointly operated by human and Concord crews, swept the outer reaches every day, watching every shadow and scanning every signal. The enemy had not returned. Whether they were gone for good or simply retreating to gather strength, no one could say. But the silence from the rim, which had once been terrifying, now felt like a held breath, rather than an ending. But it was not the same institution it had been 6 months ago. The old power structures, built on centuries of military dominance by the 3 great empires, had crumbled. The Draven sovereignty, the Corvani Empire, and the Illithian League were still powerful, but they were humbled. Their fleets had fought bravely and lost. It was humanity, the species they had dismissed and ignored for 60 years, that had turned the tide. Nobody in the galaxy knew quite what to do with that fact. On Helix Prime, the station was busier than it had ever been. Ships from every corner of the Concord came and went constantly, carrying diplomats, engineers, scientists, and soldiers, all trying to figure out what the galaxy looked like now. Commander Nathan Cole walked through the station's main corridor on a quiet afternoon, his boots clicking softly on the polished floor. The weight of what had happened, what humanity had revealed, what it had cost, and what came next, sat on his shoulders every waking moment. He had received a message that morning from Delegate Vorath Sen, requesting a private meeting. The message had been polite, which was unusual. In 15 years of dealing with the Draven diplomat, Nathan had never received a polite message from him. Formal, yes. Demanding, often. Hostile, frequently. But never polite. Nathan found Vorath in the observation lounge on the station's upper ring. It was a long, curved room with a wall of windows that looked out at the stars. Vorath stood with his back to the door, his massive frame silhouetted against the light of a distant nebula. He looked smaller somehow, or maybe that was just what happened when the certainties a person had built their life on were taken away. "Delegate," Nathan said. Vorath did not turn around immediately. He stood there for a moment, looking at the stars, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than Nathan had ever heard it. "I have been trying to understand your species," Vorath said. "For 6 months, I have done nothing but think about it, and I still cannot. Nathan walked to the window and stood beside him. Two men, one human, one Draven, looking out at the same galaxy. "What part do you not understand?" Nathan asked. "All of it." Vorath turned to face him. His dark eyes, usually so sharp and aggressive, looked tired. "You had the power. For 60 years, you had more military strength than any species in this Concord. You could have taken anything you wanted. You could have ruled this galaxy. No one could have stopped you." "That is correct," Nathan said. "But you did not. You hid your weapons. You let us dismiss you, insult you, block your proposals, and treat you like you were nothing. You let my people laugh at yours." Vorath's voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Why?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the stars and thought about how to answer a question that he had asked himself many times over the years. "Because we studied this galaxy before we ever joined it," Nathan said. "We read your histories, all of them. Every empire, every war, every civilization that rose and fell. And do you know what we found? The same pattern, over and over again. A species gains power. It uses that power to dominate others. It grows arrogant. Its arrogance makes it blind. And when the real threat comes, the one from outside, the one nobody expected, the arrogant species is too proud to ask for help, and too blind to see it coming." He looked at Vorath. "We did not want to become that. So we made a choice. We would hide our strength. We would show the galaxy our hands, not our weapons. We would be patient, and we would be quiet. And we would let you underestimate us. Because we knew that if the day ever came when the galaxy needed us, it would be better if you trusted us, even a little, than if you feared us." Vorath stared at him. "But we did not trust you. We dismissed you." "You are right, and that was a risk we accepted. It would have been easy to show our power and demand respect, but respect that comes from fear is not real. It breaks the moment the fear fades. We wanted something better than that, even if it meant being laughed at for 60 years. Vorath was silent for a long time. The nebula outside shifted its colors slowly, purple, blending into gold. "You are a terrifying species, Nathan Cole," Vorath said at last. "Not because of your weapons. I have seen your weapons, and yes, they are frightening. But that is not what keeps me awake at night." "What does?" "The fact that you had those weapons for 60 years, and you chose not to use them. That kind of restraint is not something my people understand. It is not something most species in this galaxy understand." Nathan nodded slowly. "Maybe it is something we can all learn together." Vorath looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time in all the years they had known each other, the Draven extended his hand, a human gesture that he had clearly practiced, because his massive clawed fingers were held carefully open instead of curled. Nathan took it. 3 days later, Diane Hartley stood before the reformed Concord Assembly. The chamber had been rebuilt slightly. The seating was different now, arranged in a circle instead of tiers, so that no delegation sat above another. "The galaxy we knew 6 months ago is gone," Diane said. "The structures we built, the assumptions we made, the hierarchies we maintained, they failed us when we needed them most. They failed because they were built on a lie, and the lie was that some species matter more than others." She paused and looked around the circle. "Humanity bears its share of responsibility. We hid the truth from you. We kept secrets that affected every species in this Concord, and we did it without your consent. That was wrong, even if our reasons were good." She took a breath. "But I am not here to apologize. I am here to propose something better. Not human leadership, not human dominance, but partnership, real partnership between equals, shared technology, shared defense, shared responsibility for this galaxy and everyone in it." The vote was unanimous. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began to change. Human engineers worked alongside Corvani scientists to develop new defense systems. Draven military officers trained with human soldiers, learning techniques that had been hidden for 60 years. Velani agricultural experts shared their methods with human colony worlds that had been struggling with food production. Knowledge flowed in every direction, freely and without condition. Lena Marsh, now Rear Admiral Lena Marsh, took command of the first Joint Task Force, a fleet crewed by humans, Draven, Corvani, Ilithian, and Velani, working side by side. It was messy and complicated and full of misunderstandings, because that is what happens when species that spent decades ignoring each other suddenly have to share a ship. Kyle Brogan, walking with a slight limp that the doctor said would probably be permanent, served as her second in command. He handled the logistics and the crew rotations and the 1,000 small problems that came with running a fleet where the officers did not always speak the same language. "This is harder than fighting the absence," Kyle said one evening, rubbing his leg after a long day of mediating a disagreement between a Draven engine crew and an Ilithian navigation team. Lena smiled. "That is because fighting is simple. Living together is the hard part." Megan Holt returned to Earth and threw herself back into her research. But her laboratory was different now. 6 different species had sent her their data. Physics, subspace mechanics, energy theory, fields of knowledge that would have taken humanity centuries to develop alone. She stood in her lab one morning, surrounded by screens full of alien equations, and felt for the first time that the universe was bigger than she had ever imagined. Not more frightening, just bigger. The Concord offered him every honor they had: medals, titles, a seat on the new Joint Defense Council. He declined them all with a quiet grace that surprised no one who knew him. He went home to a small house on the coast of Maine, where the Atlantic Ocean crashed against gray rocks and the air smelled like salt and pine. He sat on his porch in the mornings and drank coffee and watched the waves. Sometimes he thought about the Valeros corridor. Sometimes he thought about the 1,500 ships that did not come back. He carried their names in his memory, all of them, because somebody had to. His neighbor's kid, a girl of about 10, asked him once what he did for a living. "I was a sailor," he said. The final days of this story belonged to Nathan Cole. He stood alone on the observation deck of Helix Prime on a night when the station was quiet. The diplomats had gone to bed. The only sound was the soft hum of the station and the vast silence of the stars beyond the glass. A young Velani officer approached him. She was small, with delicate wings and wide dark eyes. She held a data pad in her hands and looked nervous. "Commander Cole," she said, "may I ask you a question?" "Of course." She hesitated. "The absence. Do you think they will come back?" Nathan looked at her. He thought about the empty spaces on the rim. He thought about the subspace distortions that the monitoring networks still occasionally detected, faint and far away, but never quite gone. He thought about the galaxy, vast, ancient, full of wonders and terrors in equal measure, and about the small, stubborn species from the outer arm that had stepped into its center and changed everything. "Maybe they will." The Velani officer looked frightened. Nathan put his hand on her shoulder, gently, the way a teacher might. "But if they do," he said, "they will not find us hiding, and they will not find us alone." She looked at him. Slowly, the fear in her eyes faded, replaced by something warmer, something that looked a lot like hope. Nathan smiled. It was a real smile, tired, but real. He turned back to the window and looked at the stars. The galaxy was not safe. It never had been. It probably never would be. But for the first time in 60 years, humanity did not have to pretend. And for the first time in a very long history, the galaxy was not divided. Out there, beyond the glass and the light, the stars burned on, and somewhere among them, moving quietly through the dark, ships of a dozen different species flew together. Ready. Not because any one species was strong enough alone, but because together they finally were. The galaxy had known about humanity for 60 years, and in all that time, not a single species had ever been afraid of them. That was exactly how Earth wanted it. The Galactic Concord was an old institution. 12 elder species governed the known stars, each one ancient, each one powerful in its own way. They had built empires that stretched across thousands of light years. They had fought wars that burned entire solar systems to ash. They had learned over millions of years that cooperation was better than destruction, but they never forgot what destruction looked like. When humanity arrived on the galactic stage in 2281, they were nothing special. A young species from a small planet orbiting an ordinary star on the outer edge of the spiral arm. They had only recently learned to travel faster than light. Their ships were modest. Their weapons were basic. Their population was small compared to the great civilizations that filled the galaxy. The Concord welcomed them the way a group of old men might welcome a child into a room, with polite smiles and very little real interest. 60 years later, nothing had changed. Humanity traded goods, sent diplomats to summits, built small colonies on worlds nobody else wanted, and never caused any trouble. They were considered harmless, useful even, in the way that a small and quiet neighbor can be useful. Someone who fixes things and never complains. Commander Nathan Cole knew all of this. He had spent 15 years as Earth's senior military liaison to the Galactic Concord, and in all that time, not one alien officer had ever asked him a serious question about Earth's military. They assumed there was nothing worth asking about. Nathan was a tall man, with gray at his temples, and a calm face that rarely showed emotion. He wore his uniform neatly, spoke softly, and never raised his voice. The aliens who worked with him thought he was pleasant but forgettable. A polite human doing a polite job. They had no idea what he actually was. Nathan stood in the observation gallery of Helix Prime, the enormous space station that served as the Concord's neutral meeting ground. Below him, through a curved window of reinforced glass, the assembly chamber buzzed with activity. Hundreds of delegates from dozens of species filled the circular hall, their voices rising and falling in a dozen different languages. The annual summit was in full session, and today was humanity's turn to speak. Ambassador Diane Hartley stood at the central podium. She was a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back tight, and eyes that missed nothing. She had served as humanity's voice in the Concord for over 20 years, and she had learned long ago that the galaxy did not listen to humans the way it listened to others. So, she had taught herself to be sharper, faster, and more prepared than anyone else in the room. Today she was presenting a trade proposal. It was a simple request, access to 2 new shipping lanes that would allow human merchant vessels to reach the outer colonies more quickly. It would benefit everyone. The data was clear. The economics made sense. None of that mattered. Delegate Vorath Sen of the Draven Sovereignty stood before she had even finished speaking. He was enormous, nearly 8 feet tall, with dark green scales and a jaw full of teeth that he never bothered to hide. The Draven were one of the 3 most powerful empires in the Concord, and Vorath had spent his career making sure everyone remembered that. "This proposal is a waste of the Assembly's time," Vorath said. His voice was deep and carried easily through the chamber. "The humans ask for lanes they do not need, for ships they barely have, to serve colonies that produce nothing of value." Diane did not flinch. "The data shows otherwise, Delegate. If you would review the economic projections on page—" "I do not need to review your projections," Vorath interrupted. He looked around the chamber, and several delegates looked away. Humanity has been part of this Concord for 60 years. In that time, you have built nothing of consequence. You have no fleet worth mentioning. You have no military power. You are a species with no teeth and no future, and I grow tired of pretending otherwise. The chamber was silent. A few delegates shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke in humanity's defense. Diane held Voras's gaze for a long moment. Then she smiled, a thin, careful smile that did not reach her eyes. Thank you for your candor, delegate. I will take your concerns under advisement. She stepped down from the podium and walked out of the chamber without another word. Nathan watched from above. He had seen this before. He had seen it dozens of times. The dismissal, the contempt, the absolute certainty that humanity was nothing. He felt something tighten in his chest, but he kept his face still. He always kept his face still. Later that evening, Nathan sat alone in his quarters aboard the Orion's Veil, the human diplomatic vessel docked at Helix Prime. The room was small and plain. A bunk, a desk, a chair, and a single locked case bolted to the floor beneath the bed. He was reading a report on his datapad when the encrypted channel opened. The transmission was from Earth's Central Command, not the public branch that handled routine communications, but the other one, the one that did not officially exist. The message was 4 words long: Condition Amber. Asset Network 7. Nathan read it twice. Then he put the datapad down and sat very still for a long time. Condition Amber was not a drill. It was not a test. It meant that something had been detected, something serious enough to move from monitoring to preparation. Asset Network 7 was one of 43 hidden networks that Earth had built across the galaxy over the past 6 decades. Each network was a web of concealed sensor platforms, weapons caches, and communication relays, buried inside asteroids, hidden in gas clouds, and disguised as civilian infrastructure. No alien species knew they existed. Nathan got down on one knee and unlocked the case beneath his bunk. Inside, resting in a foam cradle, was a device roughly the size of his fist. It was smooth, black, and featureless, with no visible buttons or screens. It looked like a paperweight. It was, in fact, a quantum-entangled command relay, a piece of technology that the Galactic Concord did not know humanity possessed. It allowed instantaneous communication across any distance, bypassing every known form of detection. Nathan held it in his hand and pressed his thumb against its surface. The device warmed slightly, and a single blue light pulsed once inside its core. Somewhere out on the galactic rim, hidden in the dark spaces between stars, machines that had been sleeping for decades began to wake up. Nathan placed the device back in its case and locked it. He stood up, straightened his uniform, and looked at his own reflection in the small mirror above his desk. The same calm face, the same quiet eyes, the same man the galaxy thought it knew. But the galaxy did not know Nathan Cole. It did not know what he carried. It did not know what Earth had built. And if things went well, it never would. But Nathan had read the reports. He had seen the sensor data from the rim, the subspace distortions, the silenced buoys, the empty spaces where signals used to be. He knew what was coming, even if the Concord did not. And for the first time in 15 years, Commander Nathan Cole was afraid. Not of the enemy. He had trained his entire life for an enemy. He was afraid because he knew that when the truth came out, when the galaxy finally saw what humanity really was, nothing would ever be the same again. He turned off the light and lay down in the dark, listening to the hum of the station around him. Somewhere out there, beyond the walls and the glass and the stars, something was moving toward them. And humanity, quiet and small and harmless, was the only species that had been getting ready.